Greetings. All right, it is time for this week's power rankings. We're to week 7. And this week, nobody moves double digits. So we're into now where teams shouldn't be moving by double digits. There are some big movers. I always wear the jersey of a team that's a big mover. Nashville tied for the largest move this week. And that's always a move in the positive. I don't wear a jersey of a team that's made a move in the negative direction because it'd be kind of mean, wouldn't it? Anyways, that being said, from 32 through 1, let's go through it. Number 32, same spot as last week, San Jose. The San Jose Sharks, they get the win tonight over Vancouver. The thing with San Jose is they were so far beneath everybody else, it's going to take a while before they'd win enough games to move up. The good news is they're close. If they have another good week this week, they may very well not be 32nd next week, and I don't know what happens then. I don't know if that's another sign of the apocalypse or whatever it is, but there we are. Number 31, same spot as last week, Chicago. So for the Blackhawks, 6-12 is their record currently. As I mentioned when I did the video today on teams at the quarter pole, I think they're right about where we likely would have expected them. But Chicago, if you take them lightly, they're capable of getting victories. I'm not saying Toronto took them lightly, but Toronto really should have beaten Chicago. And so, yeah, Chicago's 31st again this week. Number 30, and threatening to end up in the bottom spot, is Minnesota. I did not expect Minnesota to be this low. This week they dropped 2 spots from where they were last week. And last week I thought 28th was going to be the bottom. The Minnesota Wild desperately need to turn this around. I do wonder how much longer Dean Evason is there. And if somebody's going, the GM believes in him. GMs always say they believe in a coach until they don't. And when they don't tell us. Just the coach ends up being out. And I don't know how much longer you can hold out if you're Minnesota. Or if maybe Guerin pivots and says, you know what, I'll go ahead and start up the trade market. We'll see what Minnesota does. They're going to be a fascinating team to watch if they don't pull out of this, because there are definitely some pieces of the team that are there that could be interesting to see what the market would be. But one other side of this is, remember, Guerin re-upped some contracts with some guys who were expiring UFAs. They might have been worth something at the deadline, and now, of course, obviously he's not going to be able to move them. So, yeah, whole other discussion with Minnesota there. Number 29, moving up 1 spot from last week, is Columbus. The Columbus Blue Jackets, positive movement. They win a couple of games in a row. They looked good in both games. And again, Columbus looked good in some of the games they were losing. Most of the games they were losing, honestly, they looked pretty good. They just weren't getting the results. So Columbus and Minnesota came into the league together. They're down towards the bottom of the board together. But it does feel like Columbus has started to figure things out, whereas Minnesota, still in that learning stage. Number 28. And dropping 1 spot from last week, Buffalo. The Buffalo Sabres, they had that comeback victory yesterday, and then they go in today against New Jersey and they lose 7-2. So for Buffalo, it has been a tough go of it so far this season, and tonight was a time where they could have got above 500, and they managed 12 shots in that game against New Jersey. Now, the Devils, of course, getting a real boost from getting Hischier back, but Buffalo should have been able to take some advantage of that if they're going to make the playoffs this year. Number 27, dropping 3 spots from last week. And I wouldn't have thought this was going to happen, but it's the Oilers. Yeah, the Oilers are back in the bottom row. So last week they moved out of the bottom row, and I figured, you know what? They're starting to get it together. The Oilers are finally going to start to live up to expectation, and now we're back with them in the bottom row. We'll find out tomorrow. They have a game tomorrow. We'll see whether or not they're ready to turn things around. Although that being said, that'd just be one more game. So we'll see if next week they're out of the bottom row. I don't expect them to be in the bottom row much longer. Now at number 26, same spot as last week, Calgary. So Calgary's in the bottom row still. And there you go. Calgary and Edmonton weren't tethered to each other for a grand total of 2 weeks. 2 weeks. 2 weeks they weren't next to one another on the power rankings, and now here they are again. So Calgary still 26th on the board. They had a good night tonight in Denver. They just didn't get the goals. Against Prosvetov, who had a great game, but again, if they don't get the goals, they don't get the result. It's hard to bump them up. For Calgary, not a fantastic overall experience for them so far this year. I believe they're 8-10-3. I don't have the board in front of me, but I believe they're 8-10-3 at this point. Number 25 on the board. So rounding out the bottom row, dropping 7 spots from last week is Anaheim. The Ducks have started to kind of look like what we had expected them to be this year. And it's tough because everything that was clicking a few weeks ago just isn't. And they're just not getting. I think the goaltending slipped a bit. The defense has definitely slipped a bit. Everything on the team just feels like it's slid in the wrong direction. And so they find themselves back in the bottom row. I would not be surprised to see them in the bottom row next week. Keep in mind that tomorrow they're against the Oilers. So the Oilers at home should beat Anaheim. That's going to be a fascinating game because Anaheim's a team that's been kind of, doing their best to prove that they're not going to be an also-ran. They had all those comeback victories early, which of course is not sustainable. And the Oilers trying to prove that they can dig their way out of this mess they're in. So who wins? Who knows? We'll be talking about it tomorrow night. Number 24 on the board. And moving up 1 spot from last week, Seattle. Seattle's out of the bottom row. The thing with Seattle, of course, the good news, here's San Jose, here's Edmonton, here's Calgary, here's Anaheim. 1, 2, 3, 4. So they're top 4 in their division right now. On the power rankings board, and yet they're only 24th on the board overall. Seattle had a rough go last night against Vancouver. If not for that game and that result, Seattle would have been higher on this week's power rankings, but that maintains their spot right about the same. Anaheim drops below them, so they end up being bumped up because Anaheim had a really rough week. That being said, number 23 on the board, dropping 1 spot from last week, Coyotes. Now, the Coyotes did go in and beat Vegas tonight. That definitely helped prevent them falling into, say, the bottom row. But I want to see some sustained results from Anaheim, or from Arizona, I should say. Obviously from Anaheim, I wouldn't mind seeing that either. But Arizona, want to see some prolonged success from them. And who knows, maybe that win over Vegas tonight gets them there. They dropped the 1 spot this week, which is because a team passed them, and I'm wearing the team that passed them. So really, Arizona wouldn't have dropped, but Nashville, they were kind of jerks about it. Number 22 on the board this week is Nashville. So I'm going to use the reverse retro side of this puck because I'm wearing the reverse retro and the hat because mustard tiger for life, or meth tiger, depends on how you view it. But yeah, Nashville had a good week. They win 4 in a row. They're back in the hunt now for a playoff spot. Look at the West. The West is wide open. There are so many Western teams that are at the bottom of this board. It's insane. And so, yeah, Nashville absolutely could jump in and get a playoff spot now. This is where we're at. And Nashville's against Winnipeg tomorrow. If they can score an upset win over Winnipeg, they're right in this. The good news for Nashville is they're at home. And they've already lost to Winnipeg once, so they should be angry like San Jose was tonight against Vancouver. So, number 22 goes to Nashville. Number 21. Same spot as last week, the Montreal Canadiens. So the Canadiens don't move up, they don't move down. They got wins over Anaheim and San Jose, but Anaheim and San Jose have been punished thusly. And then they went into LA, and LA handled business today against the Montreal Canadiens. So to me, Montreal's in the right spot. And this is kind of what starts to happen as the season goes along. People will start getting upset at my power rankings because why didn't he move this team up or this team down? At some point, I look and I go, I think that team's in the right spot. And with Montreal, that's kind of where they're at right now, that the results are not telling me to move them up or move them down. The 21 right now is probably the right spot for them. Last I checked, I'm far more generous with Montreal and their placement in the power rankings than a lot of others on the internet. Number 20, moving up 3 spots from last week. We'll see if they can keep it up, and that's the Islanders. So the Islanders don't pay any kind of price for losing at home tonight in a shootout against Philadelphia. I treat shootouts as ties. This is why when a person will say, oh, my team's on a winning streak, why didn't they move up? And then I look at the results, and they're shootout wins. Overtime wins, and I'm like, okay, so they're not regulation wins. I put more stock in regulation wins, which the Islanders finally got. I think they had 2 of them this week. So, break up the Islanders. They're in the hunt. Again, there isn't anybody running away with playoffs in the East or in the West. It does feel like this year maybe you won't need 100 plus points to make the playoffs, which I think is better because it means that you're not having teams with ridiculously great records, and then you shouldn't have teams with ridiculously bad records either. And you should have more teams that are in the hunt for the playoffs at the trade deadline, which does make the trade deadline a little more tricky. So yeah, number 20, the New York Islanders. Number 19, moving up one spot from last week, the Blues. St. Louis did lose that game 8-3 against Nashville. I do expect Nashville fans to say that they belong ahead of St. Louis based on that game. But St. Louis's record is still better than Nashville's overall. And St. Louis usually bounces back pretty well from losses like that. So we'll see if they bounce back from this one. They do have a game tomorrow, a game they should win. I may have worn their jersey for the preview for tomorrow as well, so we'll see. My record for jerseys I wear in previews, currently 23 wins, 6 regulation losses, and thanks to the Islanders, 1 shootout loss. So pretty good record with the teams that I wear for previews. And so St. Louis I'm betting on having a win tomorrow. Number 18, dropping 3 spots from last week, but New Jersey could have dropped a lot further. That win over Buffalo prevents them dropping below both St. Louis and the Islanders. So for the New Jersey Devils, I do think 18th is probably the lowest they're going to get. I still believe this team makes the playoffs. I still think they're a good team. I think that game against Buffalo tonight was far more indicative of the team they can be than anything we've seen over the last few weeks. I guess Heishier's that important to them. So for Nico Hischier, maybe he doesn't make enough money. So at the time he signed that contract, there were some scratching heads and saying there's too much money. People who watch him play love his contract, but I think with how it just electrified the lineup tonight, if they stay like that, yeah, Heishier's underpaid. Number 17, dropping 1 spot from last week. Just the 1 spot for Ottawa. So Ottawa drops out of the top 2 rows. They're still in the hunt. They're a 500 team. Obviously, they're not exactly where they'd like to be, but it's not that bad either. Like for teams that are at 500, like Buffalo's 1 game below 500. The Islanders are a couple of games above NHL 500. It's not that bad. So fan bases might want more wins, but it does feel like this year it's a little bit more difficult. What surprises me is just how wildly inconsistent a lot of teams are in the NHL right now, considering it's November. Usually by now a lot of teams have it figured out. It's bonkers trying to figure out who the true contenders are right now. Number 16, dropping 2 spots from last week, but it could have been worse. It absolutely could have been worse, and that's Pittsburgh. The Pittsburgh Penguins, they did blow that lead against Buffalo yesterday, and then today they held on to the lead against Toronto. Now, Mike Sullivan came out with some statements towards the press. I think he's just tired of getting the same questions about blown leads all the time, and I think he's just fed up. So he just starts spouting off, and I wouldn't recommend that. But at any rate, if Pittsburgh's still in the hunt and if they're still playing well, I don't think Kyle Dubas makes any change behind the bench, and Pittsburgh looked pretty good tonight. So overall, Jari's playing well. Carlson played well tonight, and that's after last night he had an own goal going off his stick. So if Pittsburgh can get that consistent effort, they'll move up the board again. Number 15, also dropping 2 spots from last week, Philadelphia. So we have the 2 Alberta teams together and the 2 Pennsylvania teams together. Now the shootout victory over the Islanders, it's nice to see that. They do get above 500, and again, for Philadelphia, it's a matter of how far they can go. Like there's still the expectation they probably drop off and as the season goes along. Last year they stayed in the hunt, it feels like, for a while longer than people expected. Maybe this year it's different. I still think adding Couturier and Atkinson off of the injured reserve from last year makes a huge difference. But let me know your thoughts. Do you think Philadelphia stays in the hunt and ends up in the playoffs or not? Number 14, moving up 3 spots from last week, Detroit. So Detroit last week was out of the top 2 rows. This week they're back in the top 2 rows. Playing well, and again, for Detroit, they do look like a team that should make the playoffs. I mean, I have questions about like Husso and Reimer and Lyon, and is there a starter there? But you know what? The other thing I've noticed this year is just how remarkably mediocre a lot of teams' goaltending is. I'm stunned at just how many teams I look at their goaltending and I go, is it enough? And so the idea that Detroit's goaltending and Husso's numbers haven't been great, but Husso had a good game the last time out. I think Detroit's trending in the direction of playoffs at this point. Number 13, dropping 2 spots from last week, Toronto. Back-to-back losses to Chicago and Pittsburgh hurt the Toronto Maple Leafs. They're 10-6-3 on the season. And, they're right next to Detroit there. So we'll see how things turn out next week. Toronto has got to put in a full 60 minutes. They should have beaten Chicago. They absolutely should have beaten Chicago. That's just a real head-scratcher. And again, tonight against Pittsburgh, there were opportunities. There were chances there. They just couldn't bury them. And so for Toronto, I don't think there's a reason to be too panicked at this point. But mild concern is fine. Mild concern, I think, is probably the right tack to take. Keep in mind, too, though, that there are teams that go over and play overseas and then have a hard time adjusting when they come back over. That could be part of what's going on with Toronto, I guess. That could explain why it's not a full 60-minute effort that we're getting from them. But they were good in the third period against Pittsburgh. If they can, play like that in their next game, they should win it. Number 12, moving up 7 spots from last week. 7 spots. Tampa. Tampa Bay had a good week. They get Vasilevsky back. They absolutely destroy Carolina. And Vasily looked good in that game. Plus Kucherov playing absolutely great. Stamkos, it's back. They're back. Tampa Bay's back. The team that looked kind of a little bit lost and like, maybe the dynasty's done. Maybe the window has closed. They're back. They're just back. It's happened. They're back. It's done. And we'll see how far they can go and whether or not, again, it's about that sustainability. But what I saw this week, I was like, yeah, they're pretty well back. So that was an adjustment I made as soon as the Carolina game was rolling, and I was like, yeah, Tampa Bay cannot be outside of the top 2 rows. They cannot be behind some of these teams because Tampa Bay right now looks really, really dangerous. Number 11 on the board. Moving up 1 spot from last week, the Capitals. Yes, the Capitals lost against the Oilers. It was a rough 5-0 loss, but their record's still very good. They've been solid for the last month. So I look at that game against Edmonton and say, you know what? I'll give them a mulligan on that. We'll see whether or not they turn it around next week. It's just 1 game. So for Washington, they have to kind of shake that one off. And again, the good news is that they're getting wins. They've got a very good record, and Ovechkin doesn't look like Ovechkin. Not a goal scorer at this point in time like he was. He's on pace for about 20, maybe 25 goals, which is fine if he ends up with 20, 25 goals. We can revisit the conversation about whether or not he's going to catch the goal record. But it's starting to look like that may be the least of their concerns because this team is winning right now. And if they're winning, I think that's going to make Ovi fine with his goal totals dropping. At least a little bit. He's still very competitive. Number 10 on the board. Same spot as last week. Carolina. So coming off that 8-2 loss against Tampa Bay, the tricky part is this. Ronta, not good. 6 saves on 14 shots. The actual game, the actual play in the shots, Carolina probably would have won that. But Vasilevsky's back in the net, and every time the puck went in their zone, it went in the net. So for Carolina, they stay in the same spot. I didn't think busting them down made a lot of sense for this week. Again, if they suffer another loss like that this coming week, then yeah, they'll probably get busted down. But this is where certain teams will move up, and other ones will probably stay in the same spot as power rankings move along. Number 9, dropping out of the top row. Let me just find a puck here that I can use that'll work. Yeah, I'll use this one. Sure. Number 9's Vancouver. So they dropped 3 spots from last week. Vancouver officially out of the top row. Now, if I wanted to be crazy and bonkers and just an insane Canuck fan, I would say, you know what? They lost against San Jose. They've lost, I think it's 4 out of 6 right now, or 3 out of 4. I think it's 4 out of 6. But I don't want to overreact. So the same as 2 weeks ago when there were people commenting on the video, on the power rankings video, saying the Canucks should be number 1 in the power rankings. Why are you so hard on your favorite team? I'm also not going to bust them way down because they're not playing well right now. I did not feel they were the best team in the league 2 weeks ago. I also do not feel they belong in the third row, even despite that loss to San Jose. A game where by the time they woke up and started really playing, it was over. So for Vancouver, they're out of the top row. If things don't get better this week, they could find themselves as low as, I would say, 14th. If they have another tough week this week, they could find themselves as low as 14th. And I say that because Detroit I could see ahead of Vancouver. Beneath that, probably not, but New Jersey could really move up next week too. I get the feeling New Jersey's the team to watch this coming week. Number 8, dropping one spot from last week, Dallas. Dallas can be frustrating. Dallas has enough wins and enough points that I think it kind of hides some of the issues they've had lately. Last night's game against Calgary really brought those to the forefront. And it does make me concerned because if Ottinger's not, standing on his head and the defense in front of him isn't so crisp, you get nights like last night. So the Dallas Stars slip a little bit, may find themselves out of the top row next week. So I do not have 3 teams in the top row this week. I also do not have 3 teams that are in the top 6 because number 7, lay Boston Bruins. Boston drops 5 spots from last week. Back-to-back losses in regulation is one thing, but it's the way they lost those games. This is a Boston team that defensively, over 3 of their last 4 games, has looked bad. And the game against Florida that they won, that was kind of goaltending theft that went on there. So Boston's defense has been a problem. I do think, too, I even meant to mention this in the review of the Boston game today. I didn't mention it. It feels like Poitras's kind of plateaued. That, like, the really strong play early in the season, that's kind of plateaued a bit. And that's the trick with rookies. It's a really, really tough schedule in the National Hockey League. And once teams know that you got a good rookie, they scout him, they get the video, and they figured how to counteract him. And I kind of feel like that's happened with Poitras. The return of Grzelcyk did not help today. We'll see if it helps in the upcoming weeks. But yeah, Boston, I have a lot of concerns. Yes, the record's really, really good, but the last 4 games, it's been kind of ugly on the defensive side of things. Number 6, dropping 3 spots from last week, Vegas. The Vegas Golden Knights are down to 6th on the board. So we're really looking at a huge turnaround in terms of the teams that are in the top 5. Because Vegas, I believe Vegas has been number 1. Yeah, they were number 1 3 weeks ago. Boston has not been number 1 this year that I know of. They've been number 2. Dallas has been top 5. Vancouver's been top 5. So a lot of change. Vegas drops 3 spots. They haven't looked very good lately. And what surprised me tonight against Arizona was, so I don't want to not give Arizona credit for shutting down Vegas, but it's weird to see Vegas shut down at home in the third period. They did get, I think it was 13 shots in the third period. I'm not even looking at the right board. The board I'm looking at is the early 3 games from tonight. But while they had shots in that third period, I don't know how many of those were dangerous. It felt like a lot of them were from a distance. It wasn't the kind of just offensive juggernaut kind of third period that Vegas usually has. So, yeah, they end up 6th this week. Number 5, moving up 3 spots from last week. So, despite a setback, Florida ends up moving up this week. Florida's played really, really well. I think they're 7-2-1 in their last 10, something along that line. I used to, when I did the power rankings, I would have the record over the last 10 games on the board. That was before the puck board. People didn't like it as much, though, because it kind of told you who was going to end up being in the top on the power rankings board, because that's kind of how I look at it. But yeah, Florida's played really well lately, and they definitely look like they're back in form. So despite a setback this week against Winnipeg, I didn't punish the Florida Panthers for that. So number 4 on the board, moving up 5 spots from last week, Winnipeg. Last week I saw some comments about how the Jets were 9th and how dare I leave the Winnipeg Jets in 9th. The thing is, they were 9th 2 weeks in a row. Yeah, because I felt like they belonged in 9th. This week they had a great week, so they move up all the way to 4th. So it definitely helps that some of the teams ahead of them had a rough week. But Winnipeg, this is the highest I think they've ever been on the power rankings board. Unless maybe back in 2018 they might have been higher. I'm just thinking back to the 2017-2018 season. They had a very good year. And I know they ended up pretty high up in the power rankings. But for the Winnipeg Jets, I do think they're legitimate. And this is why Scheifele and Hellebuck stuck around. They believed in the team, and I think that sends the right message to that locker room too. So hopefully they can keep it up. Because now my wife's team is ahead of all 3 of my teams. So kind of rude, but I'm okay with it. Number 3 on the board. Moving up 2 spots from last week, the Los Angeles Kings. So the Kings Ever since I did that video about how they were road warriors and home warriors, now they're road warriors and home warriors. They're both. They've got a really solid record at home, and it does feel like they did what I thought they would do, which is you take that game you're playing on the road and you bring it home. You play the same way on the road as you do at home. That game against Montreal today, it wasn't like it was a really pretty game. It wasn't like it was really fast flowing. There were a lot of moments during that game where it was like, okay, there hasn't been a prime chance for a while. However, LA makes it work. And it works for LA, and they have success with that style of hockey. Their counterattack is good. They have 4 good lines. They have 6 good defensemen. And their goaltending is better than what it was advertised as about a month ago, where there were questions of, well, how's LA going to do this without goaltending? And I remember thinking to myself, the sample size is kind of small. It was. And it's now that the sample size is a bit bigger. Copley's bounced back from a rough start, and Talbot's been good pretty much the whole way through. So the Kings are legitimate to me at number 3. Number 2, and moving up 2 spots from last week, the Avs. Colorado really proved themselves. I thought the game against Vancouver, they let Vancouver hang around and then didn't. Colorado has that killer instinct back. I do think that the rough patch they had there where they got shut out, what was it, like 3 out of 4 games? Something ridiculous like that. I think that worked to their benefit. Going through those troubling times early in the year can be for the best. You don't want to go through that just before the playoffs. You want to go through it early in the season and come through the other side. And Colorado's done that. They've done really, really well. The Avs, number 2 on the board, and I think legitimately number 2. So number 1 on the board, let's see. Who would be number 1? I guess it's the Rangers, isn't it? So this is 3 weeks in a row. They're getting into pretty heady territory here. So one thing that people always say is, well, whoever ends up first in the power rankings doesn't really matter because come playoff time, the one thing is last year, obviously, Vegas wins the Stanley Cup. The Vegas Golden Knights were almost always top 5 in my power rankings. They were and sometimes they were 3 or 2, and I know they were at number 1 for a while last year. And so, yeah, it doesn't necessarily mean a cup for the Stanley Cup for the New York Rangers, but it is not a jinx being number 1 on the power rankings board. Used to be whichever team was number 1 would fall out, but since I got the puck board, it's a more solid board, so maybe it's a more solid number 1 team. No idea. But the Rangers, I think, are the best team in the league, and I think fans are starting to figure it out. I don't know if all the media believes in the Rangers yet. I know there are still some that may be waiting for them to fail and fall apart, but this team is really good, really well coached. I never said anything bad about them hiring Peter Laviolette, while plenty of other people were saying that was a bad hire. I understood what they were doing. They wanted to remain in contention, and so far, it's been a fantastic run. So, there you go. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe, because if you don't, I find out, and then I'm not happy, and it makes me sad inside. But yeah, so let me know your thoughts. Thank you guys so much for all your support as always. I hope you enjoyed Week 7's Power Rankings, and come back here a week from today and we'll discuss it all over again in Week 8. Thanks again. I'll talk to you guys soon enough.